Hey guys, and welcome to our seventh lecture in our SNHS lecture series. First of all, I'd like to get started by saying, uh, please, if you would like to get your points recorded, put your ID number in the chat, and if your YouTube username is not your actual name, then your actual name as well. Also, remember this is a school-sanctioned event, so of course, make sure that all comments are school appropriate and uh, you know, normal school stuff. Uh, I We have a very special guest here to speak to us. I'm gonna let him introduce himself, so I'll hand it off to you.
Sweet. Hi. So I'm Jake Ballard. I am a marine biology student here at Texas A&M Galveston, which is where I'm at right now. Um, I believe the big screen is showing, but I'm when I was told about like I was going to come and speak to y'all, I tried to get together some of the most important kind of advice that I have come across. I struggle with being effective, right? It's really difficult for these types of lectures to like really be effective in terms of information, but this is my best attempt at doing so. So I'll start off with like just kind of the things that I'm involved with, and then we'll work our way into any type of tips, tricks. I also accept questions at any point in time. So there's no you just interrupt me if you have a question. It will not be a problem. And more questions, the better. So, all of these pictures right now are from my the projects that I'm involved with on campus. So, if you look in the top corner, you can see my campus. This is a picture of Galveston right here. I am involved with a lot of different research projects. Right now, I'm doing biomarkers in effluent. So I'm looking at different human or essentially organic molecules that are produced. So, like if you take like antidepressants or something like that, these show up in effluent, and you can sample sediments around any type of waterway, and you can get a proxy for effluent contamination in the environment. I also am doing some geometry calculations. You do this kind of programmatically. Then it looks at what's called a UV vis spectra. So you have a molecule that has different orbitals that electrons can jump into. And whenever those electrons jump out of an excited configuration, they release a photon. That is something that can be measured, and it tells you information about the energetics of your molecule. And you can simulate this in an environment like in a computer, and you can get your data from that so that you can compare it to what you get experimentally, right, whenever you do it in the lab. And it's you can do a lot of interesting things with putting these molecules in different environments with different like solutes, and it will change the UV vis spectra. I also have just finished up a research project dealing with black mangroves in Galveston, looking at difference in microbial decomposition, and using tea bags as a like this kind of for this kind of like uh, universal identifier of decomposition. And I compared mangrove nematophores to Spartina to underneath the mangrove canopy. And mangroves are encroaching in a lot of wetland habitat because of a global climate change. There's less freezing. The freezes are less severe, so it doesn't kill them. So they're starting to really get um, well established. I also am doing research with phytoplankton. I look at how effluent concentrations impact the community composition and the dynamics of the phytoplankton species. I'm a tutor for organic chemistry, which is this photo right here is in our library. They did a really cool art in the back. They got somebody to spray paint it. I think it looks really nice. And I'm currently doing research in bioethics. So I'm looking at the component of normative recommendations in bioethics. Bioethics is a new field. It's a applied ethics field, and it's it's like when you are in hospitals or something like that, and you have severe problems, that are ethical, moral issues. How do we go about approaching those issues? So I hope to be publishing on that topic eventually, but it's currently what I'm started now. What I plan to go into eventually is the field of biophysics. So it's understanding biological phenomena using the language of mathematics and the principles and theory in physics to describe these biological phenomena. And that gives you much greater theory so that you can extrapolate and have a higher predictive power for describing these biological phenomena. A lot of this is dealing with simulations. Like in front of us is like a simulated protein with, you can see a bunch of blue proteins in the background, and some sort of maybe like metabolite or something like that that's inside of it. And this is also, there's a lot of the publications for biophysics are pretty interesting publications. It will have these types of diagrams with the mathematics that kind of go into it. So this seems to be some sort of energetics of protein folding model that was produced. I got this off of a university from South Africa. So the goal is to do biophysics and be a professor and do research, right? So that's my end game. And when I was asked to do this presentation, I really wanted, it doesn't matter essentially anything that I'm involved with. It's pretty much pointless. It's just like establishing, I guess, some sort of connection, right? Just showing that this is kind of what I do. But I really try to be helpful. Like, what really should you know to, maybe get into university, but also what's more important in general, right? I remember when I was in high school, hearing advice about university. It was never really effective. It was never really taken. I also question, the ability for people to give advice, if they're maybe a pretty bad student, or, they make a lot of, they're still making certain types of mistakes. It's like, you got to really vet who you're getting advice from. But this is my attempt at being as effective as possible of what I think people should know. And what I've just learned. So it's most updated information. I was actually having a conversation with a person at Waffle House who asked me, like, what do you think the most important piece of information you've learned thus far at university, which is in here. So we'll talk about that more. So in terms of getting into university, I can only give you a certain perspective, right? So I'm in a science field and I'm going to, hopefully, to the discipline, right? Like the scientific discipline, and hopefully going to be a professor, right? Like these are my goals. Everybody has different goals. Everybody has different things that they want to do. So I really can only give maybe advice for this specific field. I don't feel comfortable doing anything else. And also I can only give advice as an undergraduate, right? So these are the qualifiers for the type of advice that I'm giving. But getting in, I actually, getting into undergraduate is kind of similar for getting into graduate school, right? And when I make that claim, I'm compiling hundreds of pieces of advice that I've gotten from professors, graduate students, and then the experiences as being an undergraduate. So your outside kind of view, what you do, your extracurricular activities, things that you're involved with, organizations that you lead, as most of y'all are probably very aware of, right? You're in Science National Honor Society. You're maybe doing this for the looking good on your, resume when you apply. But that's very important. Letters of recommendation are some of the most vital things you can have for getting into university. In academia, people trust teachers and professors. Like they really trust these people to not lie. And because of that principle, and more so it's with professors, I will say, I feel, but the concept of a letter of recommendation is huge in academia because it's vetting your ability as an academic to accomplish whatever task. Like you're saying that from one academic to another, this person is qualified and you should take them or you shouldn't, right? So that's why the letter of recommendation is so impactful. And the experience and recommendation, this was more written for getting into graduate school, but that is a massive component. You know, that's 66% of getting into university, really. The other percentage is grades. And your grades don't have to be like fantastic. They really don't. It's kind of a myth. Nobody really cares that much about grades. Now, you've been at this location, and when I say that you've been in high school for 4 years, right? So they can't be terrible, right? You've got to say that at least I've attempted during these 4 years here, but you don't have to have anything like a 4.0. Grades are not that meaningful to people because they don't really tell you how good of a student you are. GPAs can be immensely flawed. And additionally, that measures you now as a person, right? People like in graduate school, the GRE doesn't measure uh, your intelligence now. Nobody cares about that. They measure how smart you can become, your ability to learn. So that's far more important, which is why experience and the recommendation are so vital because those attest to your ability to hold with something and try to conquer it, right? So when you're determining what exactly you wish to get for your degree, and I'm speaking in science, right? So if you're a person that's trying to become an academic in the university system, nobody cares about your degree title. It does not matter in the slightest. And remember, I'm not guessing about what I'm saying. I know this because I've asked about 100 people. Like I ask every professor that I come to. There are professors that have come that have given seminars here, and I ask them the same question as well because I kind of have a habit of acquiring advice, which is the next topic. But your specific degree doesn't really matter. My friend emailed one of the most well-cited scientists in studying cetaceans, right? So whales. And his advice was, if you want to study whales, do everything and anything but any like whale stuff until it's time to do it, right? Because when you're trying to innovate in a field, when you're trying to make new discoveries, understanding the same information is not that helpful. You want to have an ability to say, oh, I did toxicology over here and I studied this thing over here, and you can synthesize information, and that's going to help your research be more beneficial to the field because you have different tools to pick from as opposed to the same type of tool that everybody's been using in your field already. There was also another professor, really highly regarded, that started out studying oysters, and now she studies dolphins. And she got kind of a lot of hatred going into this new field because people are very territorial about their academic discipline. So they don't like people to jump around, but it's kind of a misguided piece of advice that people will give. And it's because they themselves fall victim to the mentality of protecting like the superiority, I guess, or something like that of your field. But she's an amazing publishing scientist who started studying oysters. And things like this happen time and time again. I mean, if you look at the resumes and CVs of these academics, it's filled with different types and flavors of research. So nobody really cares what you get your undergraduate degree in or your master's or your PhD. You'll probably do something completely different. Each one of these stepping stones says one thing at least, and that is, like, you know, your undergraduate says, I can stick with something for 4 years. Your master's says, I understand research, you know, I get what it means to go into articles. And your PhD says, I'm relatively proficient at doing research. I know the scientific method and I can set up a study, right? That's typically what these three components mean. And as long as you're acquiring that tool that's given by the degree, it doesn't really matter the specifics of what that research was in. The likelihood that you're actually going to be studying exactly what you published is very unlikely, and potentially like not effective, right, in making any type of innovation. So all of the stuff that I've been telling you is pretty widely agreed on upon any academic that you ask, because I have an insatiable curiosity for advice. I love asking people who are doing what I want to do how they think, what things they think I should be doing in order to get there. So a huge part of asking advice is bravery. I am not a brave person at all. I'm terrified of people. It's exhausting to um, to interact. But because I am curious and I really care about academia and wanting to be a professor, I practice being brave, right? Going up to random people, going up to random professors, going to certain meetings, trying to do things that I'm not supposed to be doing right now, essentially, as an undergraduate, in order to practice bravery, in order to practice the skill of acquiring information. Because you have to think about it. If you want to be X and you find people that are already doing what it is that you want to do, they have information for you about how to be effective at getting there, right? So if you ask 50 people the same question about how do you get there, you can acquire 50 different pieces of advice. Or even better, you can see the continuity between advice, because you can see that, oh, all of them recommend this thing. Those three things that I provided to you, the experience, recommendation, and grades, those were provided by at least 4 or 5 different professors via email. That was just email, right? There were many other professors that went into that advice outside of it face to face. One of them was a Princeton professor, Ned Weingreen, who has an amazing record for publishing. And another professor was a professor at UTMB who studies neuroscience. They both responded to my question in the exact same way, listing in sequential order the experience, recommendation, and grades in that order of magnitude about their importance. Both of them said that grades are not that important. And these are people, relatively, disclaimer, but these are people that are in the field publishing very well. So, but the bravery of being able to ask the question is so crucial, because you're never going to begin to get advice if you can't go up to people and talk to them. So it's a great skill of practicing. It's a great skill to practice. And there are really weird techniques you can use to practice bravery, like staring a stranger in the eyes. I kid you not. Like finding a stranger and staring at them in the eyes until they move, like until they look away, like being that weird. That is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying, but it increases your bravery. Anytime you traumatize yourself like that, you're going to increase your bravery. When you walk into an elevator, don't turn around and look at the door like everybody else does. Stand and look at the people in the elevator. Like, it will terrify people. They might think you'll like do something terrible, but it makes you braver. And if you really kind of imagine doing that, you can feel the hormonal rush already about, oh my God, that sounds terrible. It sounds terrifying. That's exactly why you need to do it. Dancing in a public place, like at a Jack in the Box, I had a professor that did that. That practices bravery as well. Very effective ways of practicing bravery are also emailing professors at universities you want to attend and asking them how they do what they do. That's an amazing piece of bravery practicing technique, but also the results of it can be fruitful. So I have this image right here. This is actually a building at UTMB, which is right across from my campus at Tamug. I emailed a few professors over there, just bravery practicing it up, just trying to get any type of advice. And I actually now am potentially going to be working with a professor at UTMB doing research as an undergraduate, right? This is a graduate school. And simply because I asked them for their advice on what they think I should do, they are now writing a letter to the dean of the university for me to get official approval to work in the lab, right? And even if it fails, even if the dean says, no, we're not going to be doing that, the amount of advice that I've gotten from this person and the bravery practice, that's enough. So the failure is, it doesn't matter. It's, we essentially have reaped the benefits that are to be expected from such an email. So also a super important thing, and this is the New Zealand, I'm not a massive soccer player, like but this is the New Zealand team, and they do this haka, right? You can look it up. It's this really intimidating like display, and they do it before every like soccer match. But the idea of group study and developing a team of people around you that share a common goal is so vital. It's really, really crucial to being effective at studying. So there's interesting research that lawyers who do not find study groups whenever they go to law school never become lawyers. There have been many people that have gone to law school that have now told different professors of mine about this, that if you do not study in a group, you do not become a lawyer. They all drop out because their grades fail. You can't do it. You cannot study alone. First of all, there's too many notes. There are too many notes in your class for you to write down all of them. That's why you've got your study group. That's why you've got your like family, your soccer team, to sit there and you can catch and study, what you didn't get, right? Everybody's going to be getting different things from that lecture. The studying process of quiz gaming, right? Asking each other questions. There's a whole bunch of science that goes into the effectiveness of asking yourself these types of questions, but we don't necessarily have time for that. It's really interesting, but quiz gaming yourself and asking other people questions, developing your own test questions to take, that is immensely effective. The problem is, if you don't have bravery, you're not going to do that either. So the reason why I put bravery at the beginning of these slides is if you don't have an ability to do something new, which is terrifying for people, is to do the abnormal thing. If you don't have that ability, you won't do any of the rest of the stuff that I'm talking about. That's why bravery is so vital. But the team group, most people don't heed this advice, because they're like, you know what, I'm doing it alone. And, good for you, right? Like keeping strong, I guess, to what you think, but you're wrong. It's just not effective. And your life could be so much more zestful if you would just study with a group, get a nice, good home team. Also, you can all essentially apply to college together. You could find colleges for one another. That's a really good strategy of like getting a job as well. Writing, developing each other's resumes or CVs for each other, right? Your friend will tend to embellish you more than you will yourself. So it's quite an effective strategy. So this idea right here is what I said to my friend at Waffle House when he asked me, what do you think the most important piece of information you've learned while at university? And it's the love of challenge. So in America and a lot of Western countries, the idea of intelligence, and a lot of you might hate me for saying this, but I'm going to say it because I believe in being honest. The idea of intelligence is that it is this born fixed trait kind of thing, that you're born with a certain IQ and you never get past that, which is hilarious because the person who actually developed IQ as a means for testing where you're at the current time. It's a mean of just seeing where you're at and where you need to improve on. So you can actually take an IQ test and then I can give you a hug, or you can imagine a hug, and you'll get an oxytocin release that will give you like an increase of IQ anywhere from 5 to 20 points, because oxytocin is a neurodegenerative hormone, stress hormone actually, that makes you smarter. So IQ fluctuates very much so. And whether or not you believe that you're born with a certain intelligence, affects how intelligent you actually can get. So if you are a fixed traits person, you hate challenge, you hate anything that's going to um, give you an obstacle to overcome, because you feel that if you get an obstacle, then you're not a genius, right? You're not born gifted. Which, by the way, the Gifted and Talented program is a complete facade. Which, you know, maybe some of you were in that too, and I'm sorry that you were in that. It really is a complete joke. New York has completely banned the program because it's not effective at all. You can scientifically speaking, you can't tell the difference between who took that. It's kind of the parents love it. Your parents love the fact that you're in the Gifted and Talented program because they get to tell other people, which is why they keep it in. And if you go up to principals, you know, that know anything about this, they will say, yeah, we got to keep it because the parents, right? They'll have a fit. Anyway, but you hate being challenged. You hate effort, because anytime you have to give effort as a fixed traits person, you're proving to yourself that you're not intelligent. So if you, oftentimes you'll hear, oh, I made a 50 on that test, but I didn't even study for it, as though that's an accomplishment, right? As though you're not studying is good at all. But the reason why they don't want to put effort into taking the test is if they do and they fail it, well, now they've proven to themselves that they are not intelligent, that they're not born with these gifted traits, which is a huge facade. They hate learning things. Learning is an atrocity because they need to know all of it already, right? It's disastrous. But also, the worst thing is any failure, any setback can cause clinical depression in the people that have been that have experienced the failure. Now, by the way, these are all the beliefs. These are the 4 beliefs of the fixed trait person, the person who believes that intelligence is a born thing. Malleable traits, individuals love challenge with a passion. They love it because it makes them smarter. They love effort because they know that if they're putting effort into it, that it's causing brain growth, which it is. They love learning. They love acquiring new information because it makes them smarter. They can get better and better and better, right? And any failure, when they experience failure, they get happier. They get more effective at doing things. They love failure because it means they're being challenged. They love challenge with a passion. Challenge loving, without a doubt, will change your entire perspective in life. My professor who tells people this information notices a GPA increase because the brain has been told for 90% of us, 95% of us, that your brain is something that's simply born with a set IQ. And that's terrifying, right? That's why you never want to do anything. You don't want to try anything because you're only going to prove to yourself that you don't have a high IQ. But once your brain says, oh, no way, intelligence actually might be fluid. Intelligence might be something that I can try hard and get better at. The brain can't help but think about it constantly. And that's why even if you believe what I'm saying or you don't believe what I'm saying, this is an effective thing to tell you because it will raise your GPA with or without you. It has the potential to, at least. So this is also just to talk about, Malcolm Gladwell has a really good book that I would suggest all of you read. And so many people want to go into the Ivy League world. And it's probably one of the worst things you can do as an undergraduate is do it. Graduate school is different for the Ivy League because the professors there are amazing. They're really well-funded professors. I mean, they're there for a reason. It's a really great situation. I mean, in the science that gets done there, I mean, I'm looking at certain Ivy League institutions for my graduate school, but it's one of the worst things you can do and even one of the worst things you can do as a graduate student. It's still that bad, but the risk might, I don't know. It's a really kind of tough thing, but I'm delusional. That's why. But the reason why the Ivy League is so bad and so discouraging is the culture. The culture of the fixed intelligence patronizing attitude will make you hate your life. And what happens is it's kind of like the idea of the Gifted and Talented program. In economics, only the top 1% of economics students published anything abnormally fantastic. Everybody else was relatively mediocre. So if you're not the best of the best in the Ivy League institution, you are barely distinguishable from going to any other university, which is hilarious, right? It's almost unbelievable. But Malcolm Gladwell, it's an amazing book. You should read it. The idea that people go to these universities, it's terrifying because it can discourage you from achieving your dream, right? Your passion. There are many scientists who go to these institutions, they start messing up in a particular class, right? And it's such a toxic environment that they end up dropping out and never doing science again. It makes them hate what it is they most wanted to, versus had they gone to any regular institution, any mediocre state, institution, they probably would have been a professor, because the mentality of the people is so much more beneficial. But and there's so much to go in and talk about here, but I just want to throw that out for those who will believe what I'm saying. That's a beneficial thing, and if you don't believe me, well, that's unfortunate, but it's just to catch the 2 or 3 people that might actually agree. This is a really important thing that I just discovered probably about a month ago. The idea of the classism in the university system is really interesting, right? You have undergraduates, graduate students, and then you have different types of graduate student, and then professor, right? And you've got postdoc in between the graduate student and professor, right? Like this is the classist structure. And then you got associate professor and all kinds of professor, right? Lecturer. And the idea is that you chase every single ring, right? You've got to go up one at a time. But really, in academia, there are no rules. If a professor wants you in their lab, regardless if you've taken a GRE, regardless if you've applied to a program, if a professor wants you working in their lab, they'll get you working in their lab. They don't care. Research is about publishing. That's what research is about. Nobody cares what kind of degree you have, right? They just want you to be good at publishing. Can you do scientific work? If you can do that, it doesn't matter. There was an amazing philosopher. His name was Parfit. He was at Princeton University or Oxford. I think it was Princeton University. He did not have a PhD. He didn't have any necessarily like classical training. I think maybe undergraduate or was in philosophy. And he was a world-changing philosopher. He's an amazing philosopher. He's dead now, but he had no higher tier degrees, and he was a professor there. It's phenomenal. If you're so good, they can't ignore you. So the idea about, I can't do this because I'm an undergraduate, or I can't, if you send them an email, if you show up and you work your ass off, if you show them that you are passionate about this, these rules and these barriers slowly start to disintegrate. But it takes time to realize that. That's why I'm only getting to this conclusion, a couple of, only like 3 years in, because the barriers are so obviously true until you start to jump over them and you realize, oh, wow, that was an obstacle that didn't even exist. It only existed to my mind. So emailing professors, or if you want to do research, do it right now. You can do it after this. You can turn me off and just go and start emailing professors. It's a great way to practice your bravery and have a good question. Have a good, really inquire about, get advice. Ask people for advice. They love to give the advice, but there is really no rule. There's no barrier. If they want you, they'll have you. So that's it. I hope that there was some sort of thing that was picked up. I have no idea. It's like the end of like a Rick and Morty show, where they talk about like, oh, do you think there was a meaning there? I find that quite comical. But if you have any questions, I am finished.
There are no current questions in the chat, but hopefully while I ask my question, they'll funnel in. So, you said you did research. Well, you're currently doing research, yes?
Yes.
How did you find was a good way to manage your time between your regular coursework and the lab without stressing yourself out too much and allowing yourself to have some of that breathing room, or does that breathing room just not exist?
So your question's very interesting because it is fundamentally flawed, which is hilarious. The idea of stress being bad for you was developed by the cigarette companies. So cigarettes, it's called racketeering. It's a mob crime. It's whenever you create a problem and you create a problem and then you have a solution for it and you pay for the people to use the solution. So cigarette companies loved the fact that people found out cigarettes gave them cancer because it made people more stressed out. And they sold cigarettes as a means to calming your stress down. So the idea that stress is bad for you and that you need to limit stress in any possible way is a joke. Panic is something different, but there are 4 types of stress hormones. Initially, when stress was discovered in psychology, it had the definition of anything and everything that like happens to something ever. Like that's what stress is. It's very broad. It's ridiculous that we fear it so much. There are 4 major stress hormones. That is oxytocin, like I mentioned, cortisol, DHEA, and adrenaline. All of these stimulate your brain and make you smarter. So the more stress you have, the more intelligent you get, and the better you get at coping with the stress, right? So it's a really healthy thing for you. The deal is, if you think stress is bad for you, it without a doubt kills you. If you think it's good for you, it changes your life and you become a genius. So I never worry about limiting stress. I never tried to do things ever that will make my life balanced. I live an immensely hectic life filled with stress hormones, and I strive in any possible way to get more. So I never limit stress. I always want more of it.
Thank you for that response. It's a very interesting take. I've never heard anyone respond to a question like that way before. Um, Do you have the chat open, or would you like me to relay this question to you?
You can go ahead.
All right. So from Gavin Moore, he says, "How much do you value the ability to study and observe topics in the field, quote unquote? And also, do you think this ability to study outside of the classroom makes colleges such as Texas A&M Galveston even more valuable institutions?"
Um, I I think Galveston is a really interesting. I would go to a small university if possible for undergraduate. If you want to do science, I would go for a tier 1 university, which is a university that's a research university. That's what tier 1 means. And a small population as you can get. Because a tier 1 university will have amazing professors in it. So Texas A&M Galveston has some amazing, very high publishing professors that are some of the best internationally in their field. It's amazing that we can attract, while being such a small university, it's amazing that we can attract that type of scholar. But we have the money of a tier 1 university, and we have all of that research funding, but we have small population. What small population does is it gives you an ability to interact with these professors on this kind of intimate one-on-one level where you can sit and have conversations with them and they can give you their advice. You can work in their lab. You can work in 5 professors' labs. I was working in 8 different labs at my university, like around sophomore year. I stayed here over the summer and worked in labs and did research. So you want a well-funded research-wise university with great professors and small population, because experience, because it's number 1 on the chart, that experience for going into academia is crucial. That's your selling point. That letter of recommendation, knowing that professor and having them know your work ethic and being able to validate for you academically, that matters. That's 66% of getting into your graduate school. So that is crucial. Also, above anything, being, and this is kind of responding to the first part of the question, I believe at least, being curious, genuinely curious about what you're doing, really wanting to understand it in a way that exceeds what necessarily might be required. That is crucial, because if you don't give a damn about asking the question that matters, then what are you doing, right? If you don't really care about understanding it, then why are you doing science? I mean, that the scientific method was developed by Thomas Kuhn as a means of exploring the world and gaining and acquiring information. If you don't care to do that, then you shouldn't be in science if you don't want to provide information to the world. So you've got to be genuinely curious about what it is that you want to do, about what it is that you want to study. I hope that answered it.
There's no questions currently funneling in, so we can give it a few more seconds. If there's nothing, then we can go ahead and end the stream.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, just if you, whenever you want to end it, just let me know.
Well, Gavin says thank you for responding to that question. We have another one here. It's from Ian Fu. He says, if someone has the ability to be a genius, but don't put any effort and don't ask any questions, are they still considered a genius? I suppose this is more of a less serious question, but
So if you don't put effort into it, can you be considered a genius? So this brings up the idea of a prodigy. So the interesting thing about intelligence is we have no really idea what it is. Really, psychologists are constantly trying to figure out what it means to be intelligent. So if you look at what we consider a lot of child prodigies, that is, people that are born with what we consider to be an immense IQ, right, an ability to play piano. If you examine their life, you realize that they have some sort of autism, or they have some sort of really hard learning disability, or they had a really tough life, and da 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 da, right? So more so when we talk about effort, it's effort in response to challenge, right? So you giving effort, the reason why you're giving effort is you're giving effort because there's a challenging thing. Being challenged, being stumped, that's what makes you a genius. So these people who are born with this intelligence, are not really born with anything that's obviously helpful. They're not born with an immensely high IQ. They're born with a series of problems. They're born with an immense amount of obstacles mentally to overcome. And it's the effort expenditure, the amount of trauma that it takes to overcome those learning disabilities, that poor life, that helps them become a genius so early on, because it's either that they're going to grasp it or they're not, right? And when we talk about that kind of dynamic, there really are not people that are geniuses that don't overcome challenge. It just doesn't really work like that. And if you're born with a gift, right? If somebody's gifted, it's really hard to tell what that gift is. Is it dyslexia? Is it dyspraxia? Is it some sort of autism? We don't really know what it means to be gifted with something, because it would appear, based on the science, that being gifted would be being born with some sort of mental disorder that makes it harder to learn things, because that makes you smarter faster, because you have to really overcome that obstacle. So it's a very interesting question to think about, but I don't really, their challenge is such a vital part of that. And also, if you're asking me about the nature of what intelligence is, that's a very difficult topic. So what I've said is what I can say, and hopefully maybe that approaches what it is that was being asked.
I think that's it. Well, of course, Jake, thank you so much for coming to speak out with us. Ian Fu says he was very satisfied with your question, and it does approach what he was asking. So, just want to give you some closure on that. But thank you so much for coming out and speaking to us. I really enjoyed it. I hope all of our viewers and members enjoyed as well. That being said, I am going to go ahead and end the stream. Thank you guys so much for watching. We have our next lecture in exactly, well, actually, we don't have one anymore planned. This was the last one planned. So, yeah, that's all. Thank you guys for watching. I will catch you guys later. I'm going to end the stream.